All right, this is the first video in our biochemistry unit. We're just going to go over elements and compounds, learn the difference between organic and inorganic compounds. A lot of this will be very familiar because we did very much the same thing in environmental chemistry. Elements are the simplest form of matter. The building blocks of all the more complex forms of matter, which would include compounds and mixtures. They're like our alphabet to chemistry. Elements are made of a single type of atom. There are 118 different elements, and they can all be found on the periodic table. They are represented by symbols. Let me quickly pull up a periodic table so I can explain a few things. As far as periodic table is concerned, there are 118 different elements. We know this because there are 118 different things that are listed on the periodic table. So here we have a periodic table, starting with element 1 at hydrogen, getting down here to element 118. There are 118 different elements on this periodic table. They all represent different types of atoms. All of these atoms are different in terms of the number of protons they have. Hydrogen has 1 proton, helium has 2, lithium has 3, beryllium has 4, boron has 5, and so on. These atomic numbers up through 118 tell us that every one of these elements have a different type of atom. They are made different by the number of protons they contain. What you see in large, bold letters in each box are the symbols for the elements. Now, there's a couple of things about these symbols that are important. They're either 1 or 2 letters long, most of them being 2 letters long. The first letter is capitalized, the second one is not. So right here we see cobalt, capital C, lowercase o. That is the symbol for cobalt. If you make that O capitalized, capital C, capital O, that's the formula for carbon monoxide, a totally different substance and a compound. 1 capital letter, that's an element. 2 or more capital letters, that is a compound. So that's very, very important. Symbols are 1 or 2 letters long. They're derived from the element's name. Even the ones that don't match the names, they're developed from their Latin names. Like gold is Au, the Latin word for gold is aurum, A-U-R-U-M. They're all derived from the names of the elements. 1 or 2 letters long. The first letter is capitalized, the second letter is not. And again, that capitalization is important. It means the difference between looking at an element and looking at a compound. In biochemistry, there are 5 elements that are most important. Those 5 elements are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Those 5 elements. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen are the most commonly seen 3. Nitrogen and phosphorus will make their appearance from time to time. Almost every element on the periodic table is unstable. So let me go back to the periodic table again so that we can take a look at what I'm talking about. So group 18 here, this last column, HENEARKRZERN, those are the noble gases. These are the only stable elements on the periodic table. Everything else you see, including these 2 rows across the bottom, are unstable or reactive elements. In order to become stable, they will make chemical bonds. When these elements come together to make a chemical bond, energy will be stored in that bond. If that bond is later broken, those 2 atoms are separated again, the energy that was stored in that bond will be released. Let me give you an example. When a tree grows, it will undergo photosynthesis. It will take sunlight, a type of energy, capture it in the process of photosynthesis, and store that energy away in a number of different compounds. It will make sugars, and then it will take those sugars and put them together to make starches. And one of those starches that can be made is cellulose. So cellulose is a long chain of carbons with a lot of chemical bonds in it. And what those chemical bonds do is literally store away sunlight. The energy that's in those chemical bonds is the energy that the plant captured from the sun. Cellulose is the starch that makes up wood. When we burn the wood, we break those bonds in the cellulose and release that energy. Only it doesn't come back out as sunlight again. It comes out as heat. So the heat you get when you burn a piece of wood is actually energy that was captured from the sun. It was captured by the sun and it was stored in the chemical bonds that make up cellulose, the starch that is wood. When you burn the wood, you break the bonds in the cellulose. You release that energy from the sun. But again, it doesn't come out as sunlight. It comes out as heat. The number of bonds an element can make differs from one group to another. It has to do with something you learned about in physical science called valence electrons. Carbon has 4 valence electrons and as such can make 4 bonds. Nitrogen has 5 valence electrons. It needs 3 more, so it makes 3 bonds. Oxygen has 6 valence electrons, needs 2 more, so it makes 2 bonds. Hydrogen has only 1 valence electron and needs 1 more. It makes 1 bond. This goes back to physical science when you were learning Lewis dot diagrams and ionic and covalent bonding. You tend to see similarities within groups. Hydrogen is kind of the oddball, the only nonmetal on the left side of the table. But if we look at nitrogen, for example, what group it's in group 15. Let me go back to the periodic table. Right there in group 15. Phosphorus is also in that group. So phosphorus has the same amount of valence electrons. It needs to make the same number of bonds. So since nitrogen will make 3 bonds, phosphorus will also make 3 bonds. Oxygen, group 16, 6 valence electrons, needs to make 2 bonds to become stable. And again, you can say the same thing about sulfur. You can say the same thing about selenium. There's definite patterns within these groups in terms of the number of bonds they have to make. Carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, phosphorus, those are the 5 that you're going to see all the time through this unit. Again, carbon's 4 bonds, nitrogen's 3 bonds, phosphorus, because it's in the same group, is also 3 bonds. Oxygen makes 2 bonds, hydrogen makes 1. When they make these bonds, they form something called compounds. Compounds are a chemical combination of 2 or more elements that have their own unique chemical and physical properties. They are unique substances. And we're going to look at water as a good example. Hydrogen and oxygen will bond together to make water molecules, H2O, 2 hydrogens for every 1 oxygen. Again, it's a unique substance with its own unique properties. You start off with hydrogen and oxygen, 2 gases. Hydrogen is explosive. Oxygen is the gas you need to support combustion. So if you don't have oxygen around, things won't burn. An explosive gas and the gas you need to make things burn. When you combine them together, you make water. Water is not a gas, it's a liquid. Water doesn't explode or support combustion. It's completely stable and will not burn. Totally different substance with its own unique chemical and physical properties. There are 2 types of compounds, inorganic and organic. Inorganic compounds do not have carbon-hydrogen bonds. So they can have carbon in it, they can have hydrogen in it, but the carbon and hydrogen are not bonded together. Examples include water, carbon dioxide, and table salt, a substance that we refer to scientifically as sodium chloride. So here we have a water molecule in the upper left. You see it's got hydrogen in it, but that hydrogen is not bonded to carbon. That makes it an inorganic compound. In the middle, we have carbon dioxide. We've got carbon in it right here in the middle, but the carbon is not bonded to hydrogen. It's bonded to 2 oxygen atoms instead. So again, it is an inorganic compound. Inorganic compounds can contain carbon and hydrogen, but the carbons and hydrogens are not bonded to each other. They're bonded to something else. Final example, sodium chloride, table salt. As you can see, there's no carbon or hydrogen in it at all. That makes it an inorganic substance. Inorganic compounds can be found in nature and are used by living things. That's the important part. Used by living things. Not made by, used by. Water is needed for the 8 life processes, the transport of nutrients and waste, regulation of body functions. It's used for nutrition, particularly moving nutrients around, excretion, which means getting rid of our waste products, respiration, which is the burning of sugars for energy. It's used for growth, it's used for synthesis, which is making new compounds, and it's used for reproduction. All 8 life processes require water. It's a universal solvent. It dissolves more things than any other substance does. This is why it plays such an important role in transport, particularly moving nutrients around. It's essential for cellular function. So again, humans need water, an inorganic substance. All life needs water, an inorganic substance. Carbon dioxide, the other inorganic compound we looked at, is vital to plants. It's a waste product of animals, but it's needed for plants and part of photosynthesis. It's the carbon and the oxygens that are in carbon dioxide that are used to make the sugars. Plants will break down the carbon dioxide and make new substances from those 2 elements. And then sodium chloride is needed for muscle contraction. Your muscles need sodium and chlorine ions in order for muscles to contract. It's also used in our nervous system. Nerves don't fire unless it has sodium ions around. Sodium chloride also helps move nutrients and waste around in and out of our cells. It's also a vital part of our kidneys in removing waste products from our bloodstream. So sodium chloride, again, is not made by humans, but it's definitely needed by humans, as is so common amongst the inorganic compounds. Organic compounds do have the carbon-hydrogen bonds in it, and as we go through the 4 most common organic compounds in life science, carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins, you're going to see a lot of carbon-hydrogen bonds. Lots and lots of carbon-hydrogen bonds. They are made by living things. Many of them are very large molecules called macromolecules. And again, I'll take the time here before I go to the next slide to point out inorganic compounds are needed by living things. Organic compounds are made by living things. Make sure you underline those, highlight those, or star those somewhere in your notes. Macromolecules are long chain-like molecules called polymers. A polymer is a chain made of smaller pieces called monomers. To understand the best way to think about it, the best thing to remember when you're trying to remember this stuff is to think about paperclips and paperclip chains. The paperclip chain, that is the polymer. The whole chain is the long molecule. Each individual paperclip that you find within the chain, that's the monomer. You repeat that monomer, you repeat the paperclips over and over again, linking them together to make the long chain-like polymer. Many monomers are linked together to make a polymer. So the chain, that's your polymer. Individual paper clips that make up the chain, those are your monomers. Organic compounds are a very large and diverse group of substances. And the main reason why it is such a large, such diverse group of substances is because of the element carbon. Carbon is a very special element. What makes it unique is the number and types of bonds that it can produce. Carbon is one of only 2 elements on the periodic table that can bond with up to 4 other atoms. The only other element that can do that is silicon. Nitrogen and phosphorus can bond with up to 3. Oxygen can bond with up to 2. But carbon is the only one in our set of 5 that can bond with up to 4 other elements. Carbon can and does bond together to make long chains. No other element on the periodic table does that. And those chains come in a wide variety of shapes. They can be straight chains, they can be branched chains, they can be closed chains, or ring-like structures. Each one of those would represent a different molecule with different properties. Carbon can also make single, double, and triple bonds. Nitrogen and phosphorus can also do that, but again, they can't bond with up to 4 other things. So carbon has the most variety when it comes to making chemical bonds. It can bond with up to 4 other elements. It can make long chains. It can be straight, branched, or ring-like structures. And it can make single, double, and triple bonds within those chains. There are 4 biologically important compounds. They are lipids, carbohydrates, nucleic acids, and proteins. And we will spend the rest of the week learning about those, learning what makes them different, learning what their structures are, learning what the monomers are, what the polymers are, learning the different functions they have in living things. With that, we end the notes for today. We will do carbohydrates and lipids tomorrow.